After my son locked me in the garage to impress his friends, he thought he'd won the house. He didn't realize I'd spent 8 months recording every insult, and by morning, his entire future was legally signed over to his son. Before continuing, write where you are from or what time it is. The lock clicks, the garage door heavy and final, and my own son tells me I am in the way. I stand in the oil-scented dark of my workshop on Christmas Eve, holding the carving knife I was supposed to use on the turkey I bought and paid for. In my 67 years, I have heard plenty of loud noises, but that deadbolt sliding home echoes louder than any gunshot. Quentin's voice through the wood carries a whiskey-sharpened edge of cruelty, telling me to sit tight until the guests leave. Then comes the laughter. My daughter-in-law Lindsay lets out a high-pitched giggle, joined by her mother Jennifer's raspy cackle. All three of them are celebrating my imprisonment in my own garage. I look at the fluorescent lights humming overhead, casting harsh shadows across my 5 restored beauties. There is the 1957 Chevrolet Bel Air in cherry red and the 1963 Corvette Stingray, cars I spent 40 years bringing back to life with my own 2 hands. The smell of motor oil and chrome polish is as familiar to me as my own heartbeat. Lindsay's voice drifts through the door again, joking that Dad is probably crying in there. More laughter follows. Party music starts up inside the house, drowning out the sound of their disrespect. I should feel anger, or maybe fear, but instead, something cold and clear settles in my chest like ice water. This is the final insult in a parade of disrespect that has marched through my life for 8 years. I spent the whole afternoon decorating this house at 1847 SE Spokane Street. I bought and paid for this place in 1992 when Quentin was still in elementary school. I strung the lights, hung the stockings, and prepared a turkey meant for 12 people. I was a foolish old man hoping for a family Christmas. They arrived at 5:30. Quentin walked in without knocking, heading straight for my liquor cabinet to pour my expensive bourbon. Lindsay followed with her phone out, recording everything for her Instagram followers. Jennifer scanned the room for something to complain about, calling my grandmother's glass angels outdated and wrinkling her nose at the turkey. When I tried to help in the kitchen, Lindsay physically pushed me away from the counter. She told me I was just in the way and to go sit down somewhere. When their friends arrived, couples in their 30s wearing clothes that cost more than my monthly utilities, I retreated to the corner. I watched Quentin play the gracious host with my wine and my cheese. When someone asked about me, he swept his arm in my direction like I was a piece of furniture. He called me a former auto mechanic who lives with them. I corrected him quietly, saying I live in my own house, and the whole room laughed. They laughed like I had told the funniest joke of the year. I saw my grandson Xavier, 12 years old, sitting alone on the stairs with a book. He looked lost and ignored by his parents. I walked over and put a hand on his shoulder, asking if he wanted to see the workshop. Quentin barked across the room, telling me it was not the time for my rusty old cars. The dismissal in his voice was the rust on the metal of our relationship, building up day after day while they lived in my house rent-free. I walked to the garage to get the carving knife just to have a moment of peace, and that is when I heard Quentin's footsteps and the slam of the door. Now I am listening to my son tell a story about the old man and his junk cars. More laughter follows. I look around my sanctuary, the place where I built something real while Quentin was out pretending to be something he isn't. And then I smile. They do not know about the secret passage. I built it 15 years ago in 2009 when I was running my restoration business. It is a tunnel 15 feet long, hidden behind a heavy metal shelf unit that rolls on hidden wheels. I grab the shelf, pull it aside, and open the concealed door. Cool December air rushes in. I could leave right now, get in my truck, and drive off into the night. But that would be too simple. I stand at the threshold and memories surface. I remember bringing Quentin here when he was 8. I lifted him up to see the engine of a 1965 Mustang. I told him if he treated the heart of the car right, it would run for 50 years. He was grinning, covered in grease, saying he wanted to be just like me. That boy is gone. The man who locked me in here has nothing of that child left. 3 months ago in late September, I heard Quentin and Lindsay in the backyard. They were talking about how this house is worth $670,000. Lindsay said I wouldn't live forever and wondered how much longer it would be. Quentin didn't disagree. He just said they had to be patient. My own son was counting down the days until I died so he could cash in. I step into the tunnel and close the door. I emerge in the backyard gazebo and see my house blazing with lights. I paid $185,000 for it in 1992 with 10 years of hard savings. I move through the shadows and slip through the back door. The party noise covers my footsteps as I climb to my second-floor study. I open my safe with my wedding date combination. I pull out a manila folder I have been building since April. It contains the living trust I established on August 15th with the best attorney in Portland. I have transferred ownership of this house into an irrevocable trust with Xavier as the sole beneficiary. I have also redirected my $500,000 life insurance policy to the grandson they ignore. I have 47 hours of audio and video from hidden cameras I installed in June. I have Quentin calling me a burden and Jennifer suggesting a nursing home to speed things up. I even have a medical exam from August 10th showing I have an IQ of 127 and perfect mental capacity. They can't claim I am senile. I take a clean envelope, slip in the documents and a spare garage key, and write a note. Quentin, you wanted the house? It was never yours to have. Merry Christmas. My hands do not shake. I feel calm, like the fog has finally cleared after 8 years. I go back downstairs, silent as a shadow, and slip out the back door. I make my way to the garage's side entrance, a door they do not even know exists. I place the envelope on my workbench where Quentin cannot miss it. I gather my grandfather's tools, my photo album of restored cars, and the original deed. I take one last look at the space that has been mine for 32 years. It belongs to Xavier now. Quentin killed the boy he used to be, but maybe I can save the boy Xavier still is. I leave through the secret passage one final time. I walk 2 blocks to where my truck is parked on Marion Street. I check my phone. It is 9:15 p.m. In exactly 1 hour, Quentin will remember he locked me in the garage. He will swagger out there to let the prisoner free, expecting to find me humbled. Instead, he will find an empty room and an envelope that will ruin his life. I start the engine and drive toward the hotel room I booked 3 weeks ago. My phone begins to ring at 9:58 p.m. It is Quentin. I set the phone to silent and let it buzz uselessly on the nightstand. The game has changed, and they have no idea I have already won. I watch the screen light up with Quentin's name, then Lindsay's, then Jennifer's. They are cycling through in increasing desperation. By 10:30 p.m., the calls are coming every 2 minutes. I imagine them standing in my empty garage, reading my 10-word note over and over. At 11:47 p.m., a text appears. Dad, please, we can talk about this. It was just a joke. Come home. I turn the phone face down. The lock clicking shut was real. The laughter was real. Now that there are consequences, they want to call it a joke. I close my eyes in the quiet hotel room, feeling no guilt. Sleep comes easy. Christmas morning arrives gray and cold. I wake at 6 a.m., a habit from 40 years of running Quinn's classic auto restoration. I eat breakfast at the hotel, and it tastes better than any meal I have had in my own house for 8 years. At 8:47 a.m., a voicemail from Quentin hits my phone. His voice is rough. He says this is insane, and he is going to a lawyer because I can't just give the house away. He talks about his rights while living rent-free for 8 years and using my utilities. I delete the message and call my attorney, Catherine Adams. Catherine answers on the second ring. Even though it is Christmas, she tells me she expects him to challenge the trust, but we built it like a fortress. We have the medical evaluation and the documents filed with the county. She confirms that I control all assets as the trustee until Xavier turns 25. Quentin has no legal standing. He is essentially a tenant without a lease. I tell her to send the eviction notice on the 26th and give them 30 days. I spend the rest of the day driving past my old shop locations. One is a brewery now, another a yoga studio, but the original on Foster Road is still a shop. I go inside and find Jerry, the man I sold the business to in 2019. He is under a car, and his face splits into a grin when he sees me. We talk shop for 20 minutes. Two men who understand engines better than people. As I leave, he mentions that Quentin is still at the dealership and he always thought we were close. I just nod. We were close 30 years ago when Quentin still thought I mattered. That evening, I listened to 15 voicemails. Quentin moves from angry to desperate. Lindsay is shrill. Jennifer says they deserve the house for putting up with me. Put up with me in my own house. The last message is from Xavier. His voice is small and confused, asking if I did something bad. I saved that one. He deserves better than parents who see him as a pawn. On December 26th, the freezing rain starts. I call my notary, Leo Fisher, and tell him to file the 30-day eviction notice. I tell him to include the utility breakdown. They owe me $240 for 7 months of unpaid electricity, water, and gas. Leo says he will include a note that the debt can be waived if they leave by January 25th without damaging the property. He thinks Quentin will fight and lose. I drive to the library next to Xavier's school and find him reading about aircraft. We sit in a quiet corner and I explain what I have done. I don't tell him about the recordings of his parents planning my death. I tell him the house is in a trust for him, so he has real security for his future. He asks if I did this because of how they treat me. He is a smart kid. I tell him I did it because I want him to have opportunities. He tells me his parents bought him a PlayStation 5 and a bunch of games, trying to get him to ask me to change the trust back. I tell him to keep the console, but to remember that real love is consistent, not a bribe. Next, I go to the office of Douglas Mitchell, the private investigator I hired in July. He has an accordion folder for me. Inside are photographs of Quentin using my classic cars for dealership events without my permission. There are credit card statements showing the authorized user accounts I've been paying for. There are 2 years of utility bills, all in my name. Doug hands me a USB drive with the 47 hours of footage. He confirms that in Oregon, recording in my own home is legal and admissible in court. He has everything organized chronologically. The conversation from September about waiting for me to die is there. Lindsay's complaints and Jennifer's suggestion to leave medications out are documented. That last one makes my blood run cold. Doug has another folder on Lindsay's income. She has been making between $800 and $1,200 a month on Instagram for 2 years through sponsorships. She hasn't declared a dollar of that $14,000 to the IRS. I sign the anonymous tip form and tell Doug to send it to the IRS fraud division tomorrow morning. I am dismantling their life with the same precision I use on engines. My phone rings as I leave the office. It is Quentin. I answer this time. He starts to talk, but I cut him off. I tell him he locked me in a garage, waited for me to die, and treated me like an inconvenience for 8 years. The talking is over. I tell him to check the mailbox on the 28th and that he has 30 days. I hang up and block all 3 of them. The old Dale Quinn would have felt guilty, but he died in that garage. The man I am now knows this is justice, not revenge. January the 2nd brings the kind of rain that tries to wash Portland clean. I am at a cafe when Leo Fisher texts me. The package was delivered and signed for at 10:47 a.m. Perfect timing. Quentin is likely at the bank right now, trying to get a loan for a lawyer or a security deposit. But I set a domino in motion back in June. The credit cards Quentin uses are authorized user accounts on my profile. I removed him as a user months ago. He kept using the cards, but I stopped paying the bills. Late fees and interest have piled up. His credit score has dropped from 720 to 580. He hasn't even noticed because the statements come to my address. Catherine Adams calls to tell me Quentin hired Marcus Reynolds, an expensive estate lawyer. His retainer is $5,000, which Quentin put on a credit card with 23% interest. I almost feel sorry for him until I remember the sound of the lock. Catherine says Reynolds has requested my medical records. When he sees the cognitive evaluation from August 10th showing an IQ of 127, he will know they have no case. But Quentin won't drop it. Pride and desperation are expensive. I drive to Premium Motors, the dealership where Quentin works, and sit in my truck across the street. I call the general manager, Robert Chen. I tell him Quentin has been using my personal collection, cars worth $340,000, for dealership promotions without my permission. I tell him I have photos and witness statements. I am not looking for legal action, just informing him that any further use is unauthorized. Robert sounds concerned and says he will look into it. I watch the entrance, knowing Quentin is inside, pretending to be a success while the walls close in. That evening, I meet Doug Mitchell again. He has the full breakdown of Lindsay's $14,000 in unreported income. I sign the final authorization for the IRS tip. They will get the letter in 2 weeks. I leave the diner feeling satisfied. Every piece is fitting into place. The trust for Xavier, the eviction, the evidence of abuse, the ruined credit, and now, the IRS. On January 3rd, Quentin leaves a desperate voicemail saying something happened at work. Then Robert Chen calls me. He found the photos of the cars and says Quentin misrepresented them as his own. He has suspended Quentin for 2 weeks without pay. That is $2,400 in salary gone when he needs it most. Xavier shows up at the garage on his bike looking worried. He says his parents are being too nice to him, making pancakes and asking about homework. He knows they want him to ask me to change the trust. I tell him the trust is about his opportunity, not punishment. He tells me they bought him a PlayStation 5 and said it was an early birthday present for July. The console cost $550 they don't have. I tell him to keep it, but to know that real love isn't a bribe. After he leaves, I get a text from an unknown number. It is Lindsay, saying Quentin lost his job because of me, and asking me to think about their son. I delete it. Another text comes from a blocked number, accusing me of destroying my son's life and asking if I want Xavier to know his grandfather is evil. I turn off the phone and open my laptop. I create a private 8-minute YouTube video from the hidden camera footage. It features Quentin asking when I will finally kick it, Lindsay saying they are only putting up with me for the money, and Jennifer suggesting they forget my meds. I set it to unlisted. On January 6th, Lindsay gets the letter from the IRS. Xavier tells me she went pale and locked herself in the bathroom. When she came out, she started screaming at Quentin, saying it was his fault for locking me in the garage. On January 8th, Quentin comes to the house. I am in the garage and listen through the door. He tries to convince Xavier to ask me to let them stay for a few months. Xavier asks why he never cared about school before now. Quentin tries to claim Lindsay is pregnant to gain sympathy. Xavier calls him out, saying he heard them lying about the pregnancy 2 weeks ago. I have never been prouder. Quentin is suspended, broke under IRS investigation, and his son sees right through him. They have 12 days left. January 20th is cold and clear. I wait in the garage as the Multnomah County Sheriff pulls up. Deputy Henderson has the eviction notice. We coordinated this last week. This isn't about humiliation. It's about consequences. I stay inside, but I hear everything. The doorbell rings, and Lindsay's voice turns shrill when she sees the notice. She screams that they are being thrown out of their own home and that I am stealing from them. Henderson remains calm, telling her they have 5 days to vacate and that the house is legally held in a trust for Xavier. Quentin tries to play the family dispute card, saying I am elderly and not thinking clearly. Henderson tells him he reviewed the trust and the medical evaluation. He tells Quentin that unless he has a court order, they must be out by the 25th at noon. I go back to the Corvette, the rhythm of the work calming me. Quentin calls me that evening. His voice is small. He asks for just 1 more month because they can't find a place. I tell him he had 8 years of my generosity and used every day of it to take me for granted. He tries to use Xavier as leverage again, saying the boy shouldn't see the family torn apart. I tell him Xavier is staying with me and will only see his parents learning to stand on their own feet. I ask him if he really thought there would be no consequences for locking me in the garage and planning my death. He hangs up, threatening to tell everyone what I have done. On January 22nd, he posts a long emotional message on Facebook, calling me a cruel father who is manipulating a child for revenge. The post gets 47 sympathetic comments in 3 hours. People call me evil and suggest Adult Protective Services should check my competence. One man calls it elder abuse in reverse. I open my laptop and look at the 8-minute video. I call Xavier and tell him people are saying bad things about me online. I tell him I have the video proof, but it needs to come from him. He agrees instantly, saying people need to see what they said when they thought no one was listening. On January 23rd at 2:30 p.m., the video goes live on Xavier's account. Within an hour, the tide turns. People are watching Quentin and Lindsay discuss my death like a business transaction. By 4:08 p.m., someone tags the dealership's page. Robert Chen calls me at 5:30 p.m. He has seen the video and the investigation into the cars is complete. He is terminating Quentin's employment immediately. He doesn't want that character representing the dealership. I feel no triumph, just certainty. I sit in my living room and think about the 8 years of biting my tongue while they treated me like an obstacle. The old Dale Quinn would have died quietly and left them everything. But he died on Christmas Eve. A text comes from Jennifer saying I ruined Quentin's life and she hopes I am proud. I delete it. They have 2 days left. January 24th brings snow to Portland. I am in the kitchen with Xavier when the doorbell rings at 9:15 a.m. It is Marcus Reynolds, Quentin's lawyer. He serves me with papers for an emergency injunction to halt the eviction and a lawsuit for emotional distress and elder abuse. He claims I manipulated Xavier and used my position to coerce him. He says they are willing to negotiate, drop the eviction, and they will withdraw the suit. I look him in the eye and tell him no. I tell him his lawsuit will fail and he will owe court costs. He has until noon tomorrow. Reynolds warns me they have medical experts to talk about the psychological impact on Xavier. I ask him if his experts can explain away an IQ of 127 and zero cognitive impairment. I tell him I have 47 hours of video of Quentin's behavior and tell him it's his move. He leaves. Xavier asks if they are really trying to use him against me. I tell him they are desperate. I drive to Catherine Adams's office and she actually laughs at the filing. She says it's the weakest injunction she has seen in 20 years. She will have it dismissed by Monday afternoon. That evening, Quentin calls and asks to see me face to face. I agree to 7 p.m. He arrives looking smaller than ever. He apologizes for the garage and for taking me for granted. Then he says they are desperate because Lindsay is pregnant. For real this time. He says they found out yesterday and can't bring a baby to a cramped apartment. I tell him to stop. I tell him Xavier heard him lying about the pregnancy 2 weeks ago. He goes pale. I tell him he isn't sorry for what he did. He's sorry it didn't work. I ask him if he meant what he said about letting nature take its course with my meds. He tightens his jaw and says, maybe in that moment he did. I tell him to get out of my house. He has until noon. I watch him walk to his car through the snow, his shoulders shaking. I don't care. On January 25th at 11 a.m., I arrive at the house. A moving truck is in the driveway. Quentin, Lindsay, and Jennifer are frantic, loading boxes. I park across the street with Xavier and wait. At 11:58 a.m., the truck pulls away. Quentin stands on the lawn, looking defeated. I walk to the door and change the locks. The click of the deadbolt sounds final. Quentin says I destroyed his life. I tell him I took back mine. February 7th is a gray morning. Catherine Adams calls at 9:47 a.m. to say Judge Morrison dismissed the lawsuit completely. He ruled that I acted within my rights and that Reynolds wasted the court's time. Quentin now owes me $8,950 in legal fees. The court will garnish his wages at his new job, which pays $17 an hour. Catherine says it is over legally and financially. Reynolds even sounded relieved to be done with the case. I sit in my kitchen, processing the fact that it only took 2 months to dismantle 8 years of exploitation. But I am not finished. They need to understand the full scale of what they lost. On February 14th, I text Quentin to come to the house at 6 p.m. He arrives early and sits in his car for 3 minutes before knocking. I let him in. Xavier is on the couch, and Catherine is in the armchair with documents spread out. Quentin asks what is going on. I tell him to sit. Catherine presents a complete accounting of Xavier's trust. The house is valued at $670,000. There is an investment portfolio of $890,000. The car collection is worth $340,000, and there is an education fund of $180,000. The total value is $280,000. Quentin's mouth hangs open. Catherine adds the $500,000 life insurance policy. She says by the time Xavier is 25 in 2038, the trust will be worth approximately $7,300,000. Quentin is speechless. I tell him he thought I was just a lucky mechanic. I tell him I built my business from one bay in 1984 to 7 locations and sold it for $1.8 million. I lived modestly because I wasn't wasteful. He never asked. He just waited for me to die. Catherine shows him the 2016 plan where he would have inherited half $1 million in the house. His face crumbles. I tell him that because he locked me in the garage and treated my generosity as weakness, I changed the plan. Everything goes to Xavier. Quentin chokes out an apology. Xavier looks up and asks if he is sorry he did it or sorry it didn't work. Quentin can't answer. Catherine shows the final addendum. If Quentin tries to manipulate Xavier or contest the trust again, everything goes to a car restoration foundation, and Xavier only gets the education fund. It is protection from his own father. Xavier tells Quentin that he prefers me because I actually listen and teach him, while Quentin only tried to bribe him. Quentin finally understands he didn't just lose money, he lost his son's respect. February 28th is unseasonably warm. Xavier and I load the 1957 Bel Air onto the trailer. We spent 6 weeks on her, new chrome, rebuilt engine, cherry red paint. We head to the Portland Convention Center for the auto show. Xavier handles the technical questions from the judges, explaining the engine modifications and the paint process. At 2:30 p.m., they announce the awards. Best in Show goes to Dale and Xavier Quinn. The prize is $5,000. Xavier's eyes go wide. I tell him the money is his because he did the work. Then I see Quentin hiding near the entrance. He approaches us at 4:15 p.m., looking thinner and humbler. He congratulates us and says the car is beautiful. He tells me he got a job loading trucks at Amazon and Lindsay is at Target. They are paying their debts, including the $8,750. He says he doesn't expect forgiveness, but realizes he has no idea who his son is. For the first time, I hear genuine remorse. I tell him the trust doesn't change, but if he does the work and becomes a real father, I might remember he is my son when I write my will. His eyes fill with tears. I tell him I am not promising anything, just a possibility if he earns it. Xavier agrees to meet him for coffee next weekend, just him, not Lindsay. We drive away, leaving Quentin in the parking lot. Xavier asks if I think he will change. I tell him I gave him a choice, and it's up to him. That evening, we sit in the garage with the Bel Air. Xavier thanks me for protecting him and teaching him. I tell him that is what real family does. We look at the Corvette Stingray next. I ask when we start. He says tomorrow. Life moves forward. My house is secure, Xavier has a future, and Quentin has to face the person he became. The garage door is a solid slab of steel and pine that I have painted 3 times since 1992. It used to represent the boundary of my freedom, but today, it feels like the entry to a kingdom. I stand on the concrete floor, the smell of 10W30 and winter rain clinging to my coveralls. Across from me, Xavier is already under the hood of the 1963 Corvette Stingray. The boy is a natural, his movements steady as he checks the fuel lines. I watch him and realize that while Quentin was counting the square footage of this house, Xavier was counting the seconds until he could help me turn a wrench. My phone buzzes on the workbench, a vibration that cuts through the silence. It is a notification from my bank. The first garnishment from Quentin's wages has hit the account, $142.50. It is a small amount, a drop in the bucket of the $8,750 he owes me for legal fees. But it is the first time in nearly a decade that my son has paid for the consequences of his own choices. I slide the phone into my pocket and move toward the Corvette. The engine is a complex heart, and right now, it is struggling with a vacuum leak that mirrors the way my family used to breathe. Forced and shallow. Xavier looks up, his forehead smudged with a streak of black grease. He asks if I'm okay, his eyes searching mine with a maturity that still catches me off guard. I tell him I am better than okay. I am finally in a room where everyone wants to be here for the right reasons. He nods and goes back to work, but I can see the question hovering in his mind. He is meeting Quentin for coffee in 2 hours. It is the first time he will see his father since the eviction truck pulled out of the driveway. I reach into the tool chest and pull out a 9/16 wrench, the chrome cool against my palm. I tell Zav that he doesn't have to go if he doesn't want to. He stops what he's doing and looks at the Stingray's radiator. He says he wants to see if his dad is actually loading trucks or if he's just saying that to make me feel better. The kid is 12 years old and already knows how to look for the evidence under the hood. I give him a small nod of approval. Trust is like a high-performance engine. You don't just hope it works, you verify the compression. The rain starts to pick up outside, drumming against the roof with a persistent rhythm. I walk to the side door, the one Quentin never bothered to learn about, and look toward the main house. It is quiet now. No Instagram filming in the kitchen, no Jennifer complaining about the smell of the turkey, no high-pitched giggles from Lindsay while I'm locked away. The silence is a luxury I had forgotten I could afford. But I know that the $7,300,000 projected value of the trust is a target that greed doesn't easily ignore. A car pulls up at the curb, its headlights cutting through the gray Portland afternoon. It isn't Quentin's car. It's a sleek, dark sedan. A woman steps out, holding a briefcase against the rain. It is Catherine Adams. She shouldn't be here on a Saturday unless something has shifted in the legal landscape. I wipe my hands on a rag and meet her at the door. She doesn't wait for a greeting. She tells me that Marcus Reynolds just filed a notice of intent to depose. They aren't going after the house anymore. They are going after the hidden camera footage. Lindsay is claiming the video I gave Xavier to post was edited to create a false narrative that led to her losing her digital career. She is suing for defamation and loss of future earnings, estimated at $120,000. I look at Catherine and start to laugh, a dry sound that surprises even me. Lindsay thinks her Instagram posts were a career, and she thinks the truth is a smear campaign. I tell Catherine that I have the raw files, all 47 hours of them. If she wants more footage, I can give her the 3 hours where she talks about which nursing home has the worst reputation, so they can save on the monthly fee. Catherine's expression is sharp as a razor. She says that isn't the best part. Because they filed a new suit, she was able to subpoena Lindsay's bank records. The $14,000 in unreported income I flagged for the IRS was just the tip of the iceberg. Lindsay has been receiving consulting fees from a property management company that Quentin used to steer business toward at the dealership. It looks like a kickback scheme. My son didn't just lock me in a garage, he was using my name and my connections to build a house of cards that is now collapsing on top of them. The phone on the bench rings again. It's Quentin. He is supposed to be at the coffee shop meeting Xavier in 10 minutes. I answer and put it on speaker. His voice is trembling, but not with remorse this time. He tells me that I have to stop Lindsay, that she's going too far, and that the IRS is at their new apartment. I look at Xavier, who has come out from under the Corvette, his eyes wide as he listens to his father break down. I tell Quentin that I didn't start the fire. I just stopped pretending the smoke wasn't there. Quentin begs me to lend him $5,000 to keep the lawyers away for another week. He says if I don't help, they will lose everything, and Xavier will have parents in prison. I look at the $5,000 best in show check sitting on the workbench, the one with Xavier's name on it. I ask Quentin if he thinks money can fix a character that was never built to last. He stays silent for 5 seconds, and in that silence, I hear the same click of the lock that started this whole war. I tell him the coffee shop is 2 blocks from his apartment, and his son is waiting. The coffee shop is a small glass-fronted place on Hawthorne Boulevard, smelling of roasted beans and damp coats. I watch from my truck across the street as Xavier walks in. He looks small against the heavy door, but he doesn't hesitate. 5 minutes later, Quentin pulls up in a beat-up sedan that looks like it's held together by rust and prayer. He doesn't look like the sales manager who used to pour my bourbon with such entitlement. He looks like a man who has finally realized the ground beneath him is made of sand. I have a tablet on the seat next to me, connected to the same hidden cameras I moved from the house to the garage. I'm not spying on Xavier, I'm monitoring the perimeter. I see Lindsay's car pull into the alleyway behind the coffee shop. She wasn't invited. She is supposed to be at her new job at Target, but she is here, clutching her phone like a weapon. She thinks she can film a reconciliation or a confrontation that will win back her followers. She has no idea that the IRS agent who visited her this morning is already drafting a lien on her accounts. Inside the shop, Quentin reaches across the table to touch Xavier's hand. Xavier pulls back, not with anger, but with a calm distance that is far more devastating. I can't hear the words, but I can see the body language. Quentin is pleading. He is likely using the same lies he used on me, the fake pregnancy, the "it was just a joke" excuse, the claim that he's doing it all for his family. Xavier shakes his head slowly. He points toward the window, toward my truck. He is telling his father where his loyalty lies. Suddenly, the back door of the coffee shop bursts open. Lindsay marches in, her face red and distorted. She isn't looking for a hug. She starts screaming at Quentin, pointing at Xavier, then pointing toward the street at me. The patrons in the shop start to turn and stare. One man pulls out his phone to record the scene. Lindsay is creating the very public incident she accused me of fabricating, but this time there is no editing needed. She grabs Xavier's arm, trying to pull him toward the door. I am out of the truck before my brain even registers the movement. I cross the street in 4 strides, the cold rain hitting my face. I push through the glass doors just as Quentin stands up to intervene. But he isn't fast enough. I put myself between Lindsay and my grandson, my 67-year-old frame feeling like a wall of solid oak. I don't raise my voice. I tell her that if she touches him again, the next person she talks to won't be a lawyer. It will be the sheriff who served her eviction notice. Lindsay freezes, her eyes darting around the room, realizing that people are filming her. She looks at Quentin and calls him a coward. She says he's letting the old bastard win again. Quentin looks at her, then at Xavier, then at me. For the first time, he doesn't look for an excuse. He tells Lindsay to go to the car. He says it's over. She spits a curse at him and storms out, the bell on the door ringing like a funeral knell for their marriage. Quentin sits back down, his head in his hands. He looks at Xavier and says he's sorry the boy had to see that. Xavier looks at him for a long time, then says he's seen it every day for 8 years. It just used to be behind closed doors. My grandson stands up and walks to me, putting his hand on my arm. He tells his father that he'll see him next week if he's still loading trucks, but not to bring the phone. We walk out together, leaving Quentin alone with a half-empty cup of coffee and the ruins of the life he tried to steal. The 1963 Corvette Stingray is finally purring, the vacuum leak sealed and the timing adjusted to perfection. It is February 20th, and the house at 1847 SE Spokane Street is quiet, except for the sound of the engine in the garage. Xavier is cleaning the interior leather, working with a focus that tells me he's processing the events at the coffee shop. We haven't talked about Lindsay's lawsuit or the IRS investigation much. We talk about torque ratios and the way the sun hits the fiberglass body. The doorbell rings at 2 p.m. I check the peephole and see Marcus Reynolds. He doesn't have a briefcase this time. He has a white envelope. When I open the door, he looks exhausted. He tells me that he is withdrawing as counsel for Quentin and Lindsay Quinn. He says they haven't paid their invoice in 3 weeks and that they are now uncooperative. He hands me a copy of the motion to dismiss the defamation suit. He says he's a professional, but even he has limits on how much fiction he can represent. As he turns to leave, he stops and looks at the garage. He asks if that's the Stingray. I tell him it is. He shakes his head and says his father had one just like it, but sold it to pay for his sister's college. He says he spent his whole life trying to buy it back, but could never find the right one. I realize then that Marcus Reynolds isn't the villain. He was just a tool Quentin tried to use to carve out a piece of my life. I tell him to come by in the summer and I'll let him take it for a spin. He smiles for the first time, a real smile, and thanks me. 10 minutes later, a silver van pulls into the driveway. It is the IRS. They aren't here for me. They are here for the records of the consulting fees Doug Mitchell found. I lead them to the study and hand over the USB drive with the 47 hours of footage. I show them the clips where Lindsay brags about her tax-free income from her sponsors. The lead agent, a man who looks like he's made of gray paper, thanks me and says this is the most organized evidence package he's seen in a year. By 5 p.m., the news breaks on social media. Lindsay's Instagram account has been deactivated, not by her, but by the platform for fraudulent activity flagged by the authorities. The comments on the old Facebook threads have turned into a graveyard of "I knew it" and "poor Dale." The social justice I didn't even ask for is being delivered by the very people who were calling for my head a month ago. I don't feel vindicated. I just feel like the clutter has finally been cleared out of the workshop. I go back to the garage and find Xavier sitting in the driver's seat of the Corvette. He's not playing with the gadgets. He's just sitting there, looking out the windshield. He asks if they are going to jail. I tell him I don't know, but that the law has a way of finding the cracks in a lie. He asks if he's still a millionaire. I tell him that according to the trust he is. He looks at the grease on his hands and says he'd rather be a mechanic. I tell him the best part about having the money is that he gets to choose to be both. Spring has finally hit SE Spokane Street, and the cherry blossoms are falling like snow across the driveway. It is April 15th, tax day. But for the first time in years, I'm not worried about the numbers. I'm standing in the yard with Xavier watching as a small humble truck pulls up. Quentin gets out, wearing a uniform with an Amazon patch on the chest. He looks tired, his face lined with the kind of fatigue that comes from 12-hour shifts, but his eyes are clear. He has a small envelope in his hand. It isn't a lawsuit or a plea for money. It is a money order for $142, the second installment of his legal debt, paid directly this time instead of through garnishment. He hands it to me and says he wanted to deliver it in person. He tells me that Lindsay has moved back to her mother's place and that they are finalizing the divorce. He says he's living in a studio apartment in Gresham and that he's actually started reading the books Xavier likes. I look at my son, the man he is becoming, and I don't see the sales manager who locked me in a garage. I see a man who is finally learning the value of the heart of the car. I tell him that the garage door is unlocked. He looks at me, surprised, his eyes filling with a hope he hasn't earned yet. I tell him I'm not changing the trust, and I'm not giving him the house. But I have a 1965 Mustang in the back that needs a new alternator, and Xavier could use a second pair of hands. Quentin chokes back a sob and nods, his shoulders finally dropping the weight of the entitlement he carried for 8 years. He walks toward the garage where Xavier is already waiting with an extra set of coveralls. I stay in the yard for a moment, looking at the house I bought in 1992. It is just wood and brick, $670,000 worth of real estate that meant everything to people who had nothing else. To me, it is just the place where I keep my tools. I realize now that the betrayal on Christmas Eve wasn't the end of my family. It was the demolition required to build a foundation that wouldn't crumble. I walk toward the garage, the sound of 3 voices discussing the Mustang's engine filling the air. The trust is ironclad, the legal battles are won, and the truth is recorded for anyone who cares to listen. But the real victory is the smell of motor oil and the sight of 3 generations of Quinn men standing over an open hood, finally working on the same engine. The sun dips below the horizon, casting long, warm shadows across the driveway. The lock on the garage door clicks, but this time, I'm the one holding the key, and the people inside are the ones who truly belong. Respect isn't something you inherit, and love isn't something you can steal. You earn them one turn of the wrench at a time. And as I close the door on the day, I know that for the first time in my 67 years, the heart of this family is finally running exactly the way it was designed to. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from, or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you were here.